See you in time.
Dekinesakwan Konaya kuhik aya Tlingit tu Yis atawe haji wuyata Gosh achtuasaku achin kanaini at wasabuti ayanach akayanach yake Gosh achin yake hechasaku Gosh tel ayach uti. We got some new microphones today. We're trying. I'm really excited about them because I could put them near people. I don't have to have wires across the room. So those of you online, let me know if they're better or worse. And we got a lot of guests today because Éedaa is uber popular. And she's going to share her thesis with us. And then after that, we got to get back into our translations. There's two things we're translating. One, they were both going from Tlingit to English. One was a kid's book, the Ishat Gawe, Wichicht with the Shah, and or Awasha, and Yeich Ha Ta. So we'll and then we'll dive into it. Thursday, we're not gonna have class. There's a language program fundraiser for Tlingit and Haida. And the chancellor bought a table, so I'm going. But you guys are encouraged to go and don't. It's $35, and it goes into the Tlingit and Haida language program. That funding that gets raised, which I heard was already $20,000 or something, gets divided between language efforts in Tlingit, Hatkil, and Samalgyach. So it's a good cause. But that means we've only got 3 classes left tonight, 2 next week. Then we meet the week after that, and you guys blow my hair back with your language presentations, and we'll have the Yeich Chata completely translated, and we'll also translate that other text. And then, and those of you who are online, just feel free to just talk if you want to talk. This is supposed to be a better system in terms of being interactive, so we'll test it. And also, at the end of class, I'll ask you guys online whether this was better or not. Do you want to stand here? Do you want to? Yeah. Do you want a remote? Do you want?
It doesn't matter. Yeah, I'll stand there.
Okay. Then I'll go sit down and watch it. Kin sawe konation gitch to what sawe gwash 2012?
When I started?
Yeah.
2012, yeah.
2012 ay konation git ayash to us to Éedaa. Yewit Tlingit sai qanakhi I awehu to yetasu sawes Éedaa awe ya ach tu kleqaitikach ya atunach awe ayawa Goodway University of British Columbia, Vancouver. Ya awe qanachasti toasagu we yuqatangi asi hasakawshikitnich qat tlach tuashka achoitu ina kawnik katinachnak Artu yake qaat tatakoe ausitini khosatini qa artu klepe yejidni kach kekulchish astu inkani.
Yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about my master's thesis that I presented. I presented it in October. I defended it in, I graduated with my MA from UBC in November. So I'm going to be talking, it's a fairly theoretical thesis. So if there are any questions at any point, please just stop me. Like, I would much prefer that you know what I'm talking about than just let me ramble for 35 minutes or however long the presentation goes. But I was really interested in looking at how we talk about things in the future in Tlingit. So Prospective Aspect in Tlingit was the title of the presentation, and that's what I did my master's research on for the past 2 years. So the moral of this story, right off the bat, the future in Tlingit is comprised of 3 separate morphemes with separate semantic contributions. So I was really interested in what things meant. So in linguistics, there's a few subdisciplines. As a linguist, you can study phonetics, which is how sounds are produced and is a bit about the anatomy of vocal cords, that sort of thing. You can study phonology, which is how sounds are sort of put together, why some languages let you have a huge cluster of consonants, for example, and some only allow 1 or 2. You can study syntax, which is the structure of sentences, why some words have to be in a particular order and not others, and then there's semantics, yeah, which is the study of what things mean. And then morphemes are the tiny little bits of words that you guys have been studying, the conjugation class, for example, things like that.
Oh, we gotta do 2 things.
I can't see the notes on that thing.
That's it?
The notes for the...
Oh, okay. Hold on, let me try and fix that. Yeah, I should be there.
Maybe show... Oh, I don't know.
What is aspect? While I try and figure this out.
So aspect, there's a slide 3 slides down that talks a little bit about this. But so
Sheesh.
aspect is sort of the one way in which time is conceptualized. So in English, we talk about different tenses. So future is considered a tense. Aspect looks at something else, but is related to tense. So when you say something, you're inherently sort of tracking 3 separate points of time in that sentence. So you're tracking the utterance time, so when something is said, the reference time, so what something is about, and then the event time, what the thing you're saying happened, when it happened, either before what you said or after what you're saying. And I have a diagram and stuff that we can talk about that. And then perspective is the aspect version of future to tense. So it's the future aspect, because Tlingit doesn't have future tense, and that's also part of the presentation. So we can talk about what that means in a second. Oh, sheesh. Okay. Yeah. So, utilizing semantic fieldword elicitation methods, which is really sort of going up to speakers, creating a context for something and asking if it was okay to say a certain verb in that context. This thesis presents a thorough compositional semantic analysis of a trimorphemic perspective aspect cluster, the ga'uga, necessary for future readings and contributing to a missing part of theoretical understanding in Tlingit linguistic literature. So what does that mean? So trimorphemic cluster, you guys have talked about the future, right, where you have to have 3 morphemes in order to make a future. Yeah, so there's 3 things. These things happen to be morphemes, and they are clustered together, so you need all 3 of them without fail if you're going to talk about something in the future in Tlingit. Which is not something that's been said in the linguistic literature, so that just in itself, showing for a fact that you need these 3 morphemes was novel. And I can talk about why that is here in a second. Yikes. Okay. So this is probably the most important example that sort of illustrates my point. So you have the example 2a here, the imperfective version of the verb to cook. And you see here in 2a there is no no future morphemes within this construction. So you have the first person subject, the cha, you have a classifier, and you have a root. And that's how you get a perfective verb in Tlingit. Then the hortative mode, do you guys know what hortative is? Have you guys talked about hortative at all? Like? So the hortative is like this let me do X. It's really interesting when you're considering how time works in Tlingit. And in the hortative mode, you just need this one ga morpheme, which I call a modal. A modal in linguistic theory is something like can or should or may, like we have in English, these sort of pointing towards the future but not certain how that is going to play out. So I should do something, but you don't necessarily know if you will. I might do something. So in Tlingit, this ga morpheme does something like that. So it's like allowing, it's less of a allow me to do X, but more like let it be the case that X might happen. So like let it be the case that I cook this thing. You have then the potential mode. Have you guys talked about potential modes at all? Fleck? Well, the potential is maybe. Maybe this might happen. There's a bit of controversy, I guess, is whether or not guaf is needed to get a potential reading. Some people and some speakers require that you have the guaf here in the front of the verb in order to get this maybe reading, and others don't. So you can have just these two morphemes attached to the verb root, this modal here that you have in the hortative, and then the irialis. Have you guys talked about irialis at all? A little bit? Yeah. Well, you also need the irialis, or this not real marker here in the potential in order to get a maybe reading. But this one here in 2D is what I was most interested in, and which is what I was calling the perspective. And I can talk about why I'm not calling it the future in this thesis here in a second. But this goes back to the example that we saw previously. You need all three of these little bits that combine together. These three bits mean something individually, and you combine them together, you get this future reading. So ideally, I was hoping that if I could find out what these three things meant, it would be easier to teach and easier to learn because they do something individually in these different constructions. And if you can sort of memorize, okay, this is a conjugation class, this is an irialis, which means it's not real, and this is like a modal, which means there's a bit of uncertainty about whether this may or may not happen. And then you can plug these in these different verb forms, starting with an imperfective verb form. And so it sort of unlocks an ability to conjugate for hortative, potential, and then future perspective. That's the idea. Yeah?
One running is Kaishi hit way a one say.
Oh, because like we have in the kokasa E, the vowel itself is not, it doesn't always show up in all verb conjugations. So when we're talking about these morphemes individually, we can say ka or ka or ka or ga. But the vowel itself is not actually part of it's not in the lexicon, it's not actually part of the morpheme. So the vowel itself is, it's what I call, it's an empathetic vowel, so it shows up, so you don't have a giant cluster of like 3 or 4 consonants at a time, but it's not actually part of the morpheme itself. So like in the literature, I think Lear has them with a vowel, and Zayush has sort of moved away from including the vowel because it changes, right? So like here, there is no vowel between the K and the W. Here there is, but then it's a U, which is the irialis. Up here you have an A, but that doesn't always happen. So the way that I've glossed them is to leave out the vowel, which is the way that Lear had written it, because the vowel is changeable. It's not always A. And for me, it seemed clear that way. Yeah. I don't know if you, what's your thoughts on that?
Seems like the A can totally go away sometimes.
Yeah.
So Zeosh was saying the letter A is a peg vowel. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It just allows you to hear the different consonants.
Yeah.
The letter U and the letter I
Yeah.
can't. They're more. They do something.
Yeah. So that like the irialis, right, is a U, which is interchangeable with a W, but so I've left it as a U with the idea that sometimes on the surface it'll turn into a W. But yeah, the vowels that Jeff Lear wrote in his notes, I've left those out because they can drop away, and they just seem to be separating consonants, so you can pronounce the words correctly. Yeah.
Okay.
So the roadmap, I'm going to be talking, you guys don't need to know this so much necessarily, but when I was presenting this, I talked a little bit about Tlingit Ani, reviewed the elders that I worked with, whose data is used throughout this presentation. I talk about my elicitation method, so how I gathered the data, how I talked to elders in order to figure out what this future in Tlingit was doing. I talk briefly about the linguistic information we already know, so I talk a little bit about Lear, a little bit about what James Crippen has done, and then what Une has done, which sort of was the basis for this. And then in section 2, I talk about the theoretical background, so this is like the very linguistic focused section. If you're really interested in linguistics, you might find this interesting. If you're not, it might be a bit dry, but that's just the way of the world, I suppose. Section 3 is the research itself. So I talk about each morpheme or the ga individually and talk about which each one of those I believe is contributing to the verb. And then I talk about results and basically present what I told you in the very beginning, that you need all three of these. All three of these have a very specific meaning, and when you combine them, that's why you get a future reading in Tlingit. And then conclusion and references. So Tlingit Ani, as you guys, I am sure are aware, is spoken in Southeast Alaska, Northern BC, and the Yukon. It's a branch of the Nodinate Athabascan language family, estimated less than 110 speakers, probably quite a bit less than that now. I worked with 4 fluent elders for this work from 3 different clans, 3 different communities, and 3 different dialects. So here's a brief Nodinate language figure. This is pulled from Crippen 2013. So Tlingit is its own branch off there, and then you have all the Athabascan languages sort of as its sister, and then the dialect family. So I worked with inland dialect, Lynn Canal, and Northern Island dialect, pulled from Crippen 2013 as well. So I worked with Carolyn Martin, John Martin, Keishi, Bessie Cooley, and then Marcia Hutch. So Carolyn Martin is Wishkitan from Hoona and is Eagle. John Martin's Tekdingtan from Hoona and is Raven. Keishi is Kokitan from Tessin, Raven, and then Goneoti. Marcia Hutch is Ganaktedi and is also Raven. And then their initials down there at the bottom. So when I'm talking about the sentences that I've gotten from them, their initials will show up in that data. So most of the data or the consulting that I did was in the summer of 2016 and the summer of 2017. The initials will be included with their data when they show up, and the rest came from Carrie's stuff of 2009 and then Une's stuff from 2017. Targeted elicitation includes explicit context. So I would create a scenario and then ask if I said a particular verb in that context, if that would be a good way of talking about that context. Vanderklok 2014 has a list of ways, or a list of contexts that is supposed to specifically target different like modal forces and flavors, modal being those maybe, should, could, would sort of contexts. Translation tasks, so I asked them if I said this in Tlingit, how would it be said in English, and then vice versa. If I said it in English, how would it be said in Tlingit. Grammaticology judgments was just, which basically meant, is this an okay sentence to say just period? And if it wasn't, then it's marked with an asterisk. And if it is, then it's left alone. And then felicity judgments, which means the sentence itself might be grammatical, but it's not good within the context that I'm asking, and those are marked with hashes. The Tlingit linguistic background, so you have the consonants and the vowels. Multimorphemic means that there are a lot of morphemes. Sometimes it's called polysynthetic. It means the verbs and sometimes the nouns are incredibly long, super complex, and each one of those little bits means something. And all of the examples I wrote were in the coastal dialect. I had to include this because I was working with inland speakers as well, but Teslin has very recently moved to the coastal dialect writing system, which is why all the verbs are written.
Did you say recently or reluctantly?
Both. Oh. Yeah, so all of the examples are written in the orthography you guys are familiar with. The literature review, so these were the 3 works that I sort of based my research on in the beginning. So Lear 1991, looking at the conjugation prefix, argued for this 4-way complementary distribution. Complementary meaning you can have one and none of the others, which is including the ga, which we'll talk about here in a minute. He talked about the irialis, saying that it was in a binary relationship between unmarked realis and morphologically marked irialis, basically meaning either you have an irialis marker or you have an unmarked real marker. Does that make sense?
So you mark it if it's not real, otherwise it's just...
Everything else is default, but so so in linguistics there's this idea of an invisible morpheme. And so Lear said that if you have an irialis marker, if you have the U in the verb, and if you don't have it, then that's still itself a morpheme that's marking a real thing, which is like, yeah. So
we have too many. How many of those do we have right now?
Too many.
Right, so we have the third-person object,
Yeah.
third-person subject.
Yeah.
We have the 0 conjugation class.
Yeah.
And then we have the 0 classifier. So
Yeah.
we don't need a fifth.
So like, he would say that here you have an irialis marker. Here you have a 0, another 0 that means real. So either it's unreal or it's real. And so yeah, you would add another 0 here to be like, oh, this is the real marker.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I see the logic.
It's kind of ironic to have a 0 being the real.
Yeah.
Unreal thing.
Well, and then so I'll talk about this here in a minute, but the concept of irialis, or this unreal marking, I mean, Tlingit's not the only language that does this. There's actually quite a few indigenous languages that mark either for some unreal situations or not, but the way that it's talked about semantically is very nebulous. It just seems to be, oh, this is unreal, but nobody really knows what that means and why some things are marked as unreal and other things aren't. Yeah, it's a very, just the concept of irialis is very weird.
Yeah.
Just semantically in general.
It's fun for linguistics, but for teaching the language, I would just say you put the irialis in there when the verb specifically has not happened.
Yes.
I mean,
With one caveat. There's one verb form where the verb hasn't happened, but the irialis is in there, and I'll talk about that. Yeah. Right, so that's what Lear said about irialis. And then he labeled the ga prefix as a modal, which is sort of like why I started thinking it was a modal to begin with. Again, those sort of may, could, would sorts of verbs that we have, or words that we have in English, is somewhat equivalent to the way the ga prefix is thought or talked about. After that, Lear wasn't a semanticist. He didn't really talk about what things meant. He didn't really talk about what it meant to be irialis necessarily, or what it meant to be a modal marker, and he didn't talk about what it meant to be a conjugation prefix either, and so that's the where I found things were lacking in the literature. Like, what do these mean? Like, when you put these into verb forms, what does it mean? For me, it's much easier to learn things and to memorize things if I have some sense of what I'm combining actually means. So that's sort of where I started. Cable, so Seth Cable in 2016 proposed some stuff about modal analysis, talked about hortative verbs, considered this trimorphemic, or these three morphemes as a chunk, but didn't really talk about what it meant to be both a chunk and then having them separately. And then he talked about things being circumstantial necessary, circumstantially possible, and I'll talk about what that means. It's a linguistic theory about modals in particular, and it'll be easier to conceptualize once I get to the chart. So Cable started this sort of line of reasoning that these things mean something, but he didn't consider what they meant individually. And then Zeusz, Kripa in 2017, argues that the irias marker functions as a clause marker, or a clause typer. And I can talk a little bit about what that means here in a minute. But those are the background. That's what's been written, and then we're moving along past that. So Hyman Krautzer are famous semanticists, and so is Frege, and so this work sort of falls in their line of thinking as well. The idea is we can better understand this cluster if we understand its parts. Yeah, so this means if we have an understanding of what they mean, we should be able to build from an imperfective verb up to a future conjugated verb, seeing what these things are contributing semantically, or what they're contributing, what their meaning is. So a little bit about the theoretical background when I was talking about aspect and tense. So when we say things, we're concerned with 3 points of time. We're concerned with the utterance time, or when we've said something, so the time at which the sentence under consideration is uttered or said. We're concerned with the event or the eventuality time, which is the ET, the time of the relevant situation or eventuality. And we're concerned with the reference time, or the time span to which the speaker is talking about. This comes from Wake 2015. So there's this idea of aspect versus tense. I'm sure you guys have talked about how the tense in English doesn't match up quite naturally with the tense in Tlingit, and this is part of the reason why. Tlingit is more concerned with two of these in relation to each other, and English is concerned with the other two in relation to each other. So aspect is a relationship between the ET and the RT, or the event time and the reference time, which is what Tlingit is more concerned with, and tense is more concerned with the reference time and the utterance time, which is what English is generally more concerned with. So for example, we have this idea of past tense, so she was sleeping, or we have this idea of present tense, she is sleeping. But for the sort of English aspect equivalent, we have the perfective, she had slept, the imperfective, she sleeps, and the prospective, she is going to sleep. And so in the little diagram here, this is the reference time, and this is the event time, she is going to sleep. This is what Tlingit is more concerned with in comparison to the way English conceptualizes time. Does that make sense? Thoughts? Questions? Yeah.
Could we go quickly back to your descriptions of utterance and reference?
Yeah. Yeah.
So which two are English concerned with?
English is concerned with reference and utterance time. So when something has been said and the time that it's referring to.
And then Tlingit?
Tlingit is concerned with the event time and the reference time.
So it doesn't really matter when you said it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and so this is really interesting. So English locates you specifically in this time. Everything's referring to this particular time, whereas Tlingit, it doesn't particularly matter.
No.
And so that's a concept that I think really challenges people. And
Yeah.
there are other concepts that really challenge people where you can just reach out and grab this material. And you could say something like, and if you don't know the cultural reference and the way that Tlingit works, you wouldn't know that that means we're just going to imitate our ancestors, because it doesn't say ancestors, and it doesn't particularly say imitate.
Right.
It just says we're going to look like them.
Yeah.
We're going to do something that looks like them. So
Yeah.
basically, I guess the literal translation is we're going to do it looking like it.
Right. Yeah.
And so, if Tlingit is more concerned with the relationship between event time
Yeah.
being like the event of the verb described,
Yeah.
and reference time, the time span to which the speaker's claim is confined.
Yeah.
What does it mean by speaker's claim?
So if I said he shopped or he cooked. In English, so you have this concept of time being relatively linear. And then he cooked, I said it right here at this particular time. So this is the utterance time. The reference time is because I said cooked, because it's past tense in English. I'm talking about sometime before this period. So this is the reference time. And then the cooking happens sometime within this. So this is the event time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so the ed in English, the past tense marker, is pointing back from when I said whatever I said. So that's I'm referring to something before. I'm referring to something that happened before I was talking, and then the event time happened sometime in that period.
Okay.
Yeah. If I said he cooked yesterday, well, the reference time is yesterday, and then sometime within yesterday, he cooked.
Right.
That's why it's difficult for people to predict things like before I was born.
Yeah.
That's really hard to predict. That's right.
But how would that look different for Tlingit saying he
It
cooked
just
it?
means I had not before.
Well, in Tlingit, he cooked it. It's to talk about things in the past. Tlingit doesn't have past; it has perfective. So the cooking is done. It's sort of before you were talking, but it cares. It doesn't care as much. It can be. It's just saying that the action is completed.
Mm.
It could happen like right here. It could happen, 1,000 years ago. It doesn't care so much like in relation to this. It's just saying that it's finished.
What if you're a vampire and spoke Tlingit? 700 years old.
Huh.
I know what I'm gonna do to my final project now.
Is it a vampire?
700-year-old vampire.
That's awesome.
Tlingit vampire.
You can only write it at night.
Somebody will say chop and a ketchup. Yeah. Well, so this might be related. Kaja, like I always think about the way my kids put language together now. So Kaja, he always says the other day. That's the only time reference he really uses. But I don't know if that's something that I don't know if he's getting. I don't know where he's getting that because I don't think I say the other day.
The other day.
You away.
Yeah, just one day. So.
Any other questions? Cool. Right, so this is the idea, the tense versus aspect. What does it mean? Tlingit cares more about aspectual distinctions than it does tense distinction. The only tense marker in Tlingit is the optional past tense. If you read anything from Seth's, the little in at the end of words, this is past. And that's the only tense marker Tlingit has.
It means it's not like that now.
Yeah.
Also called the deceptive marker.
Yeah. Otherwise, Tlingit cares only about aspectual distinctions. Which is why learning how to conjugate things coming from an English background is so challenging, because English conceptualizes time differently than Tlingit does. Right, so this is coming back to the debate around the irialis marker. Irialis modality is a modality that connotes that the proposition or the utterance with which it is associated is non-actual or non-factual or not real. So irialis versus realis, this idea of real versus unreal. This is a hugely debated semantic category, so it kind of makes sense that even for Tlingit, we're still struggling to know what it actually means semantically, and even in this presentation, even though I spent 2 years looking at this, I don't have a super good idea. I can only sort of say this is where it shows up, this is what I think it means, but we still need to consider this, I think, really from a Tlingit perspective, talking to elders specifically, and finding ways to sort of unlock what they already naturally know in a way that we can explain for learners. But Michael, 2014, proposed that this category was what was considered the canonical irialis marker. So you ought to have unreal marking if you have irialis in your language in the future, in the negative, in the hypothetical, conditional, imperative, obligation, that sort of thing. So in these categories, if you have what's considered a standard irialis marker, it should show up in all of these verb forms. Tlingit doesn't, but no languages except for one does, so it's not unusual in being unusual in that sense. So yeah, this is coming from a language called Nanti. This is where he got his data from. And then going to modality, so von Fintel, another semanticist, sort of summarized modality as a category of linguistic meaning having to do with the expression of what is possible and what is necessary. So you have examples of modality in English, and there's this three-way distinction between the two. So you have words that talk about things that are possible. So in English you have can, things that are weakly necessary, or things like ought to happen or should happen, and things that are absolutely necessary, like must, things that actually like really have to happen based on biology, for example. Like if you have to cough, you have to cough. And then you have this separation between circumstantial, so the circumstances are such that these particular potatoes can grow in Washington, or the circumstances are such that you're really allergic to something and you have to cough, for example. Deontic, which is also kind of a hard category to explain. It's like something to do with laws, or like the way the world works. Yeah. So in English, he can eat. You ought to do your homework. You must wear your seatbelt because that's the law here in Alaska. And then, oh, I forgot that you guys were a part of this. And then the epistemic category, which is the most nebulous of all of them. So might, should, and then like Zayush, for example, must be at the restaurant because he said he was going to be there at a certain time, that sort of thing. Is there any questions about that? I don't know if the online.
I have a hard time getting Ken, like, out of elders. Like,
Yeah.
He can write it right, and they just like, he's gonna write it right.
Yeah, well, so
They don't really like to deal with like.
it's because Tlingit doesn't have Tlingit only has this.
Yeah.
It either is going to happen or maybe, and that's it.
Yeah, you don't really deal with like, I can write my name.
Yeah.
Right. You just.
So the way that like Tlingit people talk about the future, either it's going to happen from like their perspective, or it's a maybe. Like you don't get this like can, ought to, should, like either it happens or it doesn't.
Right.
I think Keishi like constantly said either it happens or it doesn't. Like either you're doing it or you're not. Like there's no.
And there's one that relates to Tlingit, like you could say Tlingit Ausikut. That would mean somebody who knows the Tlingit language. But you say Tlingit Ausikut, but that means they know how to make it.
Right.
They're a competent speaker, I think is how the speakers would think about that. So you could tie it to, you would have to use a verb to talk about what's happening. I can't.
Right, so the possibility and then the circumstantial deontic, this is considered force and flavor. So the force of an utterance and then the flavor, the force being possible, weakly necessary or necessary, and then the flavor being the circumstantial deontic epistemic sort of ideas. So how does this apply to Tlingit? We talked a lot about these linguistic concepts. And so this next section is looking at the morphemes, the ga'uga individually, and what they mean in consideration of this like background in linguistic theory. So the conjugation prefix, for example, Lear says that there are 4 of them. There's one that we're particularly interested for this talk, but we'll talk about all 4 briefly. There's n, g, ga, and 0. Have you guys talked about conjugation prefixes? Yeah, okay. And I'm proposing that they have 3 different functions. So in directional verbs, they're directions. They're, up or down, that sort of thing. When you're talking about emotion verbs specifically. In other verbs, anything that's non-directional, they're temporal prefixes, or they mark some sort of time. So like in the future tense, it marks that it's future. That's what the God does. And then lexically specified components. So some verbs just have conjugation prefix built in. Some verbs just come out, and that's the conjugation prefix that it always has, unless you're conjugating for a different time. So some verbs will have, even in the imperfective, will have this conjugation prefix as part of its verb. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So you're saying they're built in, but there's also room for.
Well, they're built in the in the sense that they show up out of the lexicon with this particular conjugation prefix just as part of it. But yeah, if you're going to conjugate for the future, then you're always going to have ga. So it's overridable. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like how to teach these things, like cha, nata, gedan, but then kukwacha, kukwata, kukwaluk, kukwadaha. But then sort of talking about how these things get put together, I go back and forth on whether we should teach them as like, this is what this thing is, and this is what it's for. And then there's these modal things, which don't mean anything, they just put the word in the second one. Which is kind of, because they kind of have some meaning attached to them as well.
Right. Well, I think that they do mean something, and I think in order to teach them, you would have to teach them, like, this is motion, this is time, and then some verbs you just have to memorize. They come out with this prefix as part of it. Yeah, so I think you'd have to teach them in like 3. At least that's the way that I would think about them, as the 3 different things, because they are motions. They have very clear meaning. Time, they have somewhat of a clear meaning. We're still not super sure about it. I mean, the prefix that I'm talking about for this presentation, I'm pretty freaking sure that it means future. But for the other ones, I don't know yet. But yeah, I think, I guess if I was teaching it, I'd have to teach them in like two very distinct parts.
So ga only comes in the future, so that one's linked to future.
Yeah.
Na comes up in the progressive and
Yeah.
effective, so it has to do with this in the process of
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
And then ga pops up in the future, but then there's a different ga.
Yes, there's 2 gas, and that's also everything we're talking about is coming in.
Okay.
Yes. Right, so the conjugation prefix, table 5 is for motion. So you have upward, unbounded, downward, in motion that has some sort of endpoint. And so example 3, you have all 3 of them with one root. So you can see the different motion paradigm throughout the one verb. So if you change just one thing, you change the conjugation prefix, you're going to get these 4 different meanings. Yeah. Ta-da.
Now you're saying that is it.
Yeah.
Is the second person.
Yeah.
Singular subject.
I guess you could say,
It's
Yeah,
just
cool.
it's just in there.
well, like, so vowels, cross-linguistically, but also in Tlingit, like to change their shape. They're pretty interchangeable, yeah. So it can be up depending on some sort of phonological constraint saying that this plus this,
Instead of
it
like
wants to be an
the-
instead of an eh.
Are you marking something that's not? Yeah.
Right.
Is that right? Because
Oh, for the classifier mark necessarily.
well, in a command form, there's no subject
Yeah.
except plus the classifier.
Yeah. Yeah.
For the same reason.
Does this make sense?
What's the difference between B and D?
D and D.
B and D. Are they not close? Not close?
Oh, B and D. The N. So there's a 0. So there's
Probably in the meaning.
yeah.
So
So both to there, you have the 0 prefix marker as part of the verb, and then N you have for B you have N, which is both towards there. So both to there and both towards there. In English is somewhat nebulous, but in case you have a very strong, these two mean different things
right.
so
So like
spatially.
for walking, day na go would be go towards that thing. Go would mean get right to that thing.
Right.
So it has to do with like you need to end your walking right at that thing.
Right.
And so that's the kind of difference.
Has an upswing that goes down and up, and it also has an endpoint. I'm guess the upward motion, downward motion, and a motion that has an endpoint, I mean, they're not mutually exclusive, so do you just like,
Oh, like how would you combine, like if you wanted
Yeah.
to talk about something that went up and then also across and then also stop?
Swing.
Yeah, I have no idea.
It would be not because it would just go back and forth.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
But to hit something would probably be 0 because it makes that contact
and it bends?
and re-go. Because if we say, for example, in English, if we said hit the ball, we don't care where the bat goes afterwards. We just care that they hit the ball. It's all about that contact.
You would probably, like if you wanted to describe that process, you would probably, it'd be multiple sentences, I think.
But why do they say yagagu? I don't know about that one. Which means, like say if kids are running, you say yagagu, and that means walk. Because I would say adnagu, but that means go walk around.
Yeah.
Yagagu. That one throws. I just throw half the shit because I don't know.
There's no way we'll ever know. Isn't that
But there is this other sort of. It's not upward motion though.
Yeah.
But it is ga.
Yeah.
And so you would say, like you could say, yakashi. And this is why they say, like let's say we were robbing a place, and the cop show would say gishi. That's how you say run.
Yeah.
And just like to just generally tell someone to do something.
Yeah.
And regardless of what the motion is. Right? So,
Yeah, there's still a lot of stuff that we don't know about motion in general, but yeah, that's the summary as far as I understand it.
oh, you gotta check the chat box.
Oh. How do I do?
We're gonna have to take a break here. Yeah, why? Shanaki.
Right, so for the function of the conjugation prefix that I was most interested in was the time one. So in example 4, she will be kind, you have the conjugation prefix talking about something in the future, and then you have the description of what I believe each of those are doing temporally in table number 6. So you have ga as being part of the perspective or the future and being progressive. Ga is unspecified, basically meaning I have no idea, so I just left it like that. And then the 0 being imperfective generally.
Anybody know how to say be kind? Like a command form. It's a conjugation. It requires an object.
Ula
You say it to kids and they're gonna laugh at you. He took the on.
Like T-O-O-K?
Well, it's just T-U-K. But they're gonna laugh and say he took the on. It's just what they're gonna do. That comes from experience. So I say K took the on.
Yeah, so that is what I'm proposing that the conjugation contributes. It's part of this perspective, and it shows up in the perspective or the future. There's other stuff that can be talked about, what it means when some verbs have it lexically specified, or verbs that come out of the lexicon with a conjugation class already specified. There is a debate about the existence of 0, whether or not there is a 0 marker for the imperfective. We have this 4-way distinction that Lear proposed, but there's debates around whether or not the 0 is actually a thing. And then there's homophony, or homophony is when the thing sounds exactly the same but means 2 different things. Whether or not the ga conjugation is homophonous with the or the ga conjugation prefix is homophonous with the ga modal prefix, and whether or not they're 2 separate things. There's debates around that as well. I didn't talk about that. I'm just letting you know that that's there.
Yeah, for the time being, I teach them as 2 separate.
Right. I think they actually are 2 separate things. Right, so to summarize this particular section, I'm claiming that the ga conjugation prefix is a future demarker.
God, there's that feature.
Oh.
Break time.
Well, do you get things with both colors and
Keep me under control.
and
You can't have ga. You can't have those. You can have ga and qa.
What about like
When can you have ga?
She has. I think I have an example.
You're sure it's ga.
Which is why I think I said that it is 2 separate things, because you can have both.
Well, maybe the one ga is the self-benefactive.
That's exactly. De-stressing. I'm supposed to turn my thesis.
Oh yeah, so there's
Friday.
multiple goes too.
Stress.
Are there multiple goes and multiple colors?
No, there's only one ga.
What about the self-benefit, like gasa'i?
Maybe there's 2 gas then.
It's just not. It's not used very often. Okay. You're gonna hug about that. This one. So when he says, Achait aiwu, so there's a command, right? Achait aiwu. And then he says, Yika ki an kwakut. So that's one, because now he's using these. So that's a potential.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's another really fun one in here. Let's see. It goes, is that the nas? And then hinqa naqsa'in. Right? And then this one. Eqitqatuq shquqaqashu.
Oh, wow.
And so is a really interesting thing. Qitqa, okay, that's fine. Tuq, okay. Shquqaqashu. So now you've got q,
Yeah.
and then this part is
Yeah.
where you're getting the qa, kha. You're getting qa, qa, kha,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that gets you qa, qa.
So that's the gaga. You said that there was a possible.
No, I said you can't have ga, ga.
Oh, yeah, you can.
Yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
are the two
Qa, conjugation, qa, the qa mode. But that's the thing that leads me to think that the others, they've got to be just modal things, I think. But this one's different than the conjugation ones, though, right?
What's conjugation and
That's exciting.
Because, but qa is the only one that there can be two of them, right? Like you can't have na, na, and you can't have
Well, yeah,
ga,
so
ga.
that's what, yeah, that's why they're two separate things.
That's why
Ga
I actually wasn't here on
and
Thursday. I
ga,
had to do
you
some
have a conjugation and have a modal. They have to be two separate things because they appear together.
go to classroom home that I.
Okay,
But,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you want to do more? Okay. But we're going to have to move on pretty soon. Oh, the whole class? Okay, okay, keep going. We'll do the rest of it. Hmm? Okay.
Oh, no.
You go.
It did something.
Did you take your presentation? Did you record it?
It's this stupid Google Drive chat.
Yeah, so that's the conjugation class. I'll talk about the irias a little bit. The irialis shows up in prospective verbs, so in future verbs, which is like example 5a. It shows up in negation, like example 5b. It shows up in potential verbs, like 5c. And then it shows up in a small number of lexically specified verbs. So it shows up as some verbs always. Verbs come out of the lexicon with an irialis marker, like in 5d.
Oh, I know where it pops up. In the comparative.
Yeah, it doesn't pop up, and that's weird.
Right. It doesn't always, but it usually does.
Interesting.
Because you say ye kuge.
Yay, kuke.
It means, so it has to be in there.
Mm.
But the reason that it pops up there is because when you're comparing it, it's not actually that thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Makes sense.
So if we go back to the table that I showed in the beginning, and we talk a little bit about the fact that the literature is a bit nebulous on what it actually means to be an irialis. So there's this thing called a subjunctive, which shows up in future, imperative, conditional, hortative, and potential, but does not show up in negation. And then we have what the canonical irialis is supposed to show up in. So it's supposed to show up in future, imperative, conditional, negation, hortative, and potential. This is where Tlingit sort of deviates between the two. So it doesn't seem to be fitting into either one of these categories super nicely. So it shows up in the future. Okay, cool. It doesn't show up in the imperative. It doesn't show up in the conditional, which is weird because the conditional is sort of necessarily not real, and yet you don't get an irialis marker there. But it does show up in negation. It doesn't show up in the hortative, and it does show up in the potential. So it's doing something irialis-y like and doing something subjunctive-y like, but isn't really fitting into those categories perfectly in any situation. So I think it's doing its own thing, which is not uncommon, I don't think, but yeah.
What is the subjunctive?
The subjunctive is super similar to irialis. It's so coming from Matthewson 2000 that talks about the subjunctive. It's supposed to be again something that's not real, but negation isn't part of that paradigm. So there's been a debate in linguistics whether or not irialis is a subjunctive, whether we can merge these two categories. But negation throws a wrench in that, I suppose, and then Tlingit's off doing its own thing. Yeah,
So this is like Yesh irialis.
I guess. Right, so this research, to summarize, I'm claiming that it's doing something. It has some sort of meaning, it shows up, and it's triggering some sort of difference when you add it versus when you're not. It's not just there, like it's contributing something, it means something. We don't necessarily know what it means yet. It might just be marking that this is not real, just like, hey, we're talking about something that might not have happened yet. But even this concept of what it means to be real or not real in different languages is really hard to describe. So I'm formalizing it as a presupposition trigger, which semantically just means I'm going to write it in a particular formula that says it's triggering something that hasn't happened yet. So I'm sort of just leaving it at that for this formalization, but there's a lot more research that needs to be done as to what it's actually doing semantically. Like, how do we teach it? Right now, I mean, assuming that it marks something that hasn't happened yet seems to be a pretty good bet. I think if you include that in a verb, you're going to be pretty successful in that, in using that, but what it's actually doing is still up for debate. And then the modal prefix, so the last morpheme in this cluster, it was labeled by Lear as a modal prefix, and Cable says that it can only do what you see in Table 8. So Seth Cable says that this modal prefix can only appear in a circumstantial, possible, or necessary situation. If we remember the table that I showed for the English, what that's sort of conceptualized as, and it can only be circumstantial. Does that make sense? This is what Cable is claiming. I'm going to deviate from that a little bit. But.
Yeah, I was gonna say, didn't you say it was more in the epistemic, or what was it, rather than circumstantial? Tlingit was more concerned with the.
Yeah, well, so what am I saying? This is what I'm saying Tlingit does. It's both deontic and circumstantial, but there is no epistemic, which is why it's really hard to get speakers to talk about can or might or whatever. Like, it either is or it isn't, and that's sort of shown in what this morpheme can do. Yeah, so if we go back again to example 1 and we look at imperfective, hortative, potential, and prospective, and we get these 4 different readings, the addition of the modal, it changes the meaning. It means something, and so when you add it, it's doing something, which is shown by the table right here.
Where's the potential plus that?
The what?
Where's the potential plus that?
I don't know. I'm gonna be very upfront and be like, I did not look at like classifiers at all. 3 morphemes was more than enough. Yeah. So Tlingit, you can get a hortative, a potential that is deontically or circumstantially possible, and the prospective, the future, can only be deontically weak. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay. So the table shows us 3 things that ga encodes. So as part of its meaning, it's circumstantial. It has to be circumstantial. Cable's analysis was somewhat applicable to this approach of looking at those 3 individually, once you think about things a little bit differently in the way that he described them. And then the modal prefix is capable of contributing any modal force, but is restricted by the verb it's used in. Right, so these are some examples of the context that I used in order to ask Keishi if this was possible. So this context is considered a circumstantially possible context. So Zayush loves talking about potatoes. These potatoes are from Kwekwan, but the soil and temperature is conducive to growing them in Bellingham as well. And so I'm looking for something like the potatoes can grow in Washington, and Keishi only allowed this hortative verb mode to be anything near can, which is let the potatoes grow in Washington. This hortative raven type speak.
She uses, inland speakers use the dach a lot.
Yeah.
And so the difference between hus and dach is like each one of them. But she seems to prefer the dach when she's talking about non-human things as well. So there could be some connection there. But generally the dach or the daqa, sometimes it comes out as daq. It's each of them. So one of the potential differences seems to be, you could say, a dach has kautuwak. They jumped off of it. A dach kautuwak. Every one of them jumped off.
Yeah, I think Zayush was looking at the difference between hus and dach when we were up in Teslin last, and so he's got a lot of examples that he figured out something. I don't remember what it was. I was preoccupied, but yeah.
And then iskunye sani se'apa sa shakri.
Yeah, so here's an example of the U being an E. Changed to an E.
Oh.
So it is in there, it's just my thing.
Yeah. Well, because the U, the irias marker, is a vowel, it's more susceptible to changing.
Is that sa? Does it matter if it's long or short?
I don't know.
So sa is like first, and sa is only the.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Yeah, so to summarize, the ga prefix default modal flavor isn't overly specified. It can kind of do what it needs to do depending on what verb it's in, and is able to give both possible and necessary readings depending on the context. That's the summary. So wrapping it all together, here's a lot of formulas that don't really matter. They matter semantically. So I'm saying that the conjugation marker, when you're talking about something in the future, is a temporal futurity marker. it marks future. It says, hey, we're talking about something in the future. The irias prefix just triggers that presupposition that you're assuming that this is going to be true, but it's not true now. It's not real now. And then the modality marker ga restricts how strongly you believe the thing that you're saying is going to happen. And in Tlingit, again, it either happens or it doesn't. So when you're saying something is going to happen in the future, you're pretty certain that it's going to happen unless something else changes about the world. And that's what these formulas are saying. So we take all of these three formalizations, I propose some sort of tree structure like this. I'm not a syntactician, I kind of don't care about trees, but this was something that I had to include in my presentation, so there you go. They're in this order at some point. They show up in this order, I think, in the tree structure, but Zayush can argue about that. So the conclusion is these three things do three very specific things. We have to look at them individually. We can't just take them sort of for granted as this one cluster because they show up in these other parts of different verbs, and by learning what they mean individually, we have a better insight of quite a number of verbs, not just the future in particular, because, at least for me, learning them this way helped me memorize them, and it gave me a bit more agency in how I can put together verbs because I know that these three things do these three semantic things individually. Sheesh.
Sheesh.
Okay.
Any questions? Yeah.
I'm just beginning to learn about these things, but the conjugation prefixes you talked about, that's just one type of all the verb prefixes, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
there's conjugation prefix, there's thematic prefix, there's pronouns, that sort of thing. So the
Okay.
conjugation, yeah.
So,
Conjugation prefix is just one type of it, yeah.
oh cool. Yeah, I really appreciated it because I'm just learning how to conjugate verbs, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, and we were just talking online the other yesterday.
Wait,
So like,
had it before that. Tlingit.
time doesn't matter. So one thing we were talking about, so when you think of these verb modes, like there's two real areas where things seem to, well I guess three. The preverb, conjugation prefixes, suffix, and then potentially the postverb. Because we're looking at the suffix qa, and so there's one where the irialis, and so it's sort of like when you learn what these things are, and it's interesting, Mohawk, I think they went through and they color-coded their whole language when they teach it. So basically, if we did that, the subjects would all be red, and the objects would all be green, the thematics would all be purple or whatever, and then all of these things would probably be all the same color because they're just going to pop up in some combination, right? These conjugation things. And the combinations of those is going to tell you what you're going to have the verb do, right? And so you go object, thematic, conjugation, subject, classifier, root. And so that's the most important thing. But then it seems like there's some things where it seems like the meaning doesn't even necessarily matter, or it's like what happens to the verb when you attach those particular things.
And were you saying that, so when you talked about hortative and potential and prospective conjugation prefixes, were you saying that in prospective, for things to say I will blank, you combine the prefixes for hortative and potential.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you have the k, k.
Yeah, so you combine the prefixes in hortative and potential and then add one more.
Okay. And then some, like when you say yekwati, are you just dropping the Oh, yeah.
It's the
Oh.
So yeah, ka, ka.
Yekwati.
In this case, can become kwa.
Okay.
it's that
They
W
can
shape.
jump around.
Yeah, so the linear order, the conjugation and the modal prefix are always in this relationship. So the conjugation always comes before the modal, but the irias can jump from in the middle of them to the behind them based on like phonology. But there's certain ways to pronounce words in Tlingit, and Tlingit likes it in a particular order. So based on the phonological constraints, it'll jump down to the end of that cluster. And in some cases, it'll jump in front, super rarely and not for future, but yeah.
You could say good what is one way you could say it.
Oh.
But if something before the verb ends with a vowel, it's going to push it to contract.
Okay.
That's why George would say at yahaik shahid. The ka is
What's interesting is in the Nash Story dictionary, they write most futures with like, instead of like yake, T, they have it like, if you read it straight, it'd just be yake, T. They would, instead of like KGW,
Zanosh says
they
that
KW underline G.
you pick a way to write it. He argues that you're saying yay, K, W, G, W, A, T. Well, at some point you get what is standardized, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't go qua. Anyways, we better translate some stuff.
So would it be different if you were to say, I will see you later versus perhaps I will see you later? Or let it be that I'll see you later?
Those would be two different things.
Yeah, you would use different prefixes in order to conjugate that verb.
Yeah, we'll look at Akisha, the way that she recorded them, to look at those examples. Do you think it's easier to explain this stuff to linguists or to Tlingit speakers?
I think it's hard in both senses. I think it's easier to explain the Tlingit stuff to Tlingit learners and Tlingit speakers because they already are aware of this. And like I had to, like during the defense, had to talk about like why, I had to defend why I was glossing things a certain way, or some people didn't believe that the things in Tlingit that we talk about all the time, like these different morphemes, they didn't believe they even existed necessarily. So I had
really?
to go like back to stuff where I know there really are this many. Yes, they really do these things. But then like the linguistic sort of concepts like modality and irias, like those are terms that people in the linguistic community already know. So I didn't have to spend as much time talking about that. So it's different. It's just different. But it's much more satisfying to explain it here because
Right.
it's applicable, right? Like people, I mean, hopefully it's useful. Whereas in a linguistic context, like it's just interesting. Like it's just a mind puzzle. That's not.
Right.
They're not learning anything yet. They don't care necessarily about who's speaking it, or they just think it's interesting. Whereas hopefully here people are like, oh, this is something that I can use.
Yeah, well, you okay? Okay, so let's, so if you were going to say, like to sort of address this question, like, so I see you. So what happens, so when we look this up, this is what we've got. So from the root over, we can see a number of different things. So we should know that what we've got here is a perfective marker. Well, so what's going to happen here is we got a 0 marker for the third person, perfective marker, cha for me, se, teen. But then what happens is we've got, so se, so the actual things that are going to contribute to contraction is going to be w, cha, se, right? So those three things, when you combine them, you get huase. But once you put the I in front of there, now that says we're getting even more contraction, and so you're going to get irse, right? So to say I see you or I saw you, you'd say irsetin, irsetin, irsetin. And then you would move to the future to say I will see you. So there's a couple things that happen. One, this is a qa conjugation class verb. So in the future, it has to have ye in front of it, right? So all the ga are going to have k, quak a, and all the qa are going to have ye. Ye qasatin, ye aguchtagan, right? Or ye aguchtagan. So here, you're going to have ye, but you're going to put the I right there for I'll see you. And this just says I will see you, right? So the su in front of it says like again. So you could say ye ik kwasatin, ye ik kwasatin, and then like let me see you would even be a more different thing. So in this case, the I in the front wouldn't affect a whole lot of things. So you'd say iqaqasatin, iqaqasatin. So that would be let me see you. And then you would get into the potential, which, this doesn't really show it, but it would really be, it would be this without, without the suffix on there. So in this case, when you see the potential attributive listed, that's saying it can't. So there's a couple ways to learn how to convert this from he or she can't to I can't. Is this underline G is going to change to underline K. And so now you're going to get, and then this is a third person right there, so you're going to get iqwach. So you should have the gwash in front of it, probably. Gwash iqwach sitin. Gwash iqwach sitin. But this is why, like, we start with let's just do perfectives and futures and imperfectives. And then later we can start doing this crazy, I can't see you. Yeah. And so that's how, you would do that kind of stuff. For now, we'll just translate some Tlingit. So this is kind of where we left off. So to just sort of move us through this story again, Yeshawe nich twugud. Atwugud dewa ausatin yat Atwutan yaqi ka. Adat awetle attuditan. Wasa ush khwasene yut yanach yan kakashladut. There's a fun one with the hortative in there. It's kakashatut. Let me entice it over here. Kahwasayu kugut sawe awat awaits u. Kaatkatu a shakir te shakir gewe ke awati. Aka awaitsa klechwat adaye ayau. Aka awaitsa ye ayausaka wait Chat hadekonis Yutsukuch away ye at idayaka. Away yet away test the was So that's where we left off. Fun stuff. So I need a reader for this line right there.
Jitsu atutan.
Okay. How would we translate that?
Brought it over.
Well, the Wutan part, though, we should be getting from, yeah, for a fish to jump.
Oh.
We had that in the bay. Where is it? Right there. That should be low.
Oh.
Play jutsu at Wutan. So we got fish. The fish is jumping around. There's a couple other parts we need to figure out how to put in there.
So it was jumping around again.
Yeah. So su is like again. Ch is sort of just, and then play is then. So you could say then he just jumped around, or it just jumped around. I guess we'll say he. Or we say the king salmon, I don't know. We'll probably just say he. Okay. Natu.
Aga away tle suye ayanas H. Maybe then after he did that, Raven said something.
Aka awe kaitsu ye again is cage. Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So we go from ayausaka, ye ayausaka to ye ayanas cage. Right? So just slightly they're different. So there's different ways you could translate that. So what are the parts we can get, right? So he's saying it, right?
Only then.
And then, yeah. And then. So, then, Clay is then, su is again, ye again is cage.
He called out again. Hey, King Sam.
Yeah, so this is sort of like he says this exact thing. But the ye and this cage, the difference, just outside of the story, just straight looking at the Tlingit, ye ayanas cage as opposed to ye ayausaka. Ye ayausaka would be like, he or she said this thing. Ye ayanas cage. That's the way ka'a. Hisakuga.
He's saying like a bunch of things.
Yeah, so
He's talking
over and over. You probably say he keeps saying it, taking it outside of the story. If you said that, you would be saying he says this every time.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of ye aganis cage. That's what she said, right? Because someone says that all the time, right? It's like some catchphrase or something. But in this context, I think I would say, and then again, he keeps saying this, right? I don't know. So these are translators got to make decisions. Okay, somebody read this next sentence. Éedaa. Ata gets ook away clock. Éedaa.
It's calling to the Kingston.
Well, so these are the quotes because this is what Raven is saying. So this is what Raven's saying. Ata, we decided was, hey, King Salmon.
Is it repeating that sentence from
Yeah,
earlier? This
it's
green
saying
thing
this
is
about
saying this about you?
Yeah, but what's the clock doing in front of it?
Angrily.
Keeps,
What's that?
keeps.
I guess, yeah, let's look for, let's see if we've got it in here. Right. So you've got a dayaqa. I might just tell you if I can't find it, but I'm gonna see if they've got it listed in here. So here's dayaqa. I don't think they really have. So here's when you put the clock in front of it, which really, and these are kind of interesting things where we kind of keep coming back to. Tlingit is really a bunch of little things that either have meaning or function. But there's certain things when you put them in a certain combination that actual individual meaning kind of falls away a little bit. So usually when you put clock in front of yawaqa or yausaqa or dayaqa, which all mean to say something, that means to insult, to criticize, to so when you say clock dayaqa, it's saying it's insulting you, right? And then, so how are we going to translate it? What are we going to do? Somebody give me the English for this one, based on that.
This little green stone is talking smack.
About you, right? This is the other part too. There are certain verbs where they're almost always a third person, right? Achina kawanik. But once that third person can switch, right? So you could say, for example, what's the difference between these in translation? Achin akawanik, achin ikawanik. First one, achin akawanik. Second one, achin ikawanik.
They're telling a story to me, and then they're telling a story to me of your story.
Yeah, so and it's interesting because like the first one would be like, and it's not a story because that would be the L classifier. So the first one, achin akawanik, he or she told me. Achin akawanik would be he or she told on you. To me. Right? Like you were, I don't know, thinking my backpack. I don't know what you were doing. You got tattled on. So this is where the I part comes in. So talk dayaqa. So for example, if I was telling you a story, aqa'awe talk khat dayaqa. Achawe yahwakwash, right? So that could be the story, right? Okay. Somebody read just that first sentence. Sheesh. Okay. So let's just do the first one. How do we translate that?
Listen to me. Listen to me.
Not to me,
Oh.
because that would be
Oh, listen to him.
Listen to him. Yanach yanchak.
Like move through here or is it something through?
Yanach would be like, yeah, over along here, along this area, right?
I looked everywhere for that last word that I
The chak part,
Oh.
what kind of word is it?
could find. Like an exclamation mark?
It's a verb.
Oh.
So, and when we, and in these ones, these commands can be tough to spell like that, right? Because like Éedaa was talking about with these, with the second person, with the commands, like there's no subject, classifier 0, so you just get the root. And this is sometimes what you get, right? Like you could say atka.
But I couldn't find like an A that was a verb by itself, or an AK that was a verb by itself, or I couldn't find the stem.
Oh, okay.
You know.
So chak would be the stem,
Oh.
right? And so the yun part pops up before a verb to mean to completion, right? To have it finished. And so usually once we look at these structures enough, ya, nach would be there's a direction. And we haven't done motion verbs yet, right? So this is just something totally kind of new. And then the yun part means to come all the way over here. And it has to do with him being in the water. So if we look up X apostrophe, to swim underwater. This is how the fishies swim, right?
How many zeros would you gloss on that one?
Oh, and that one?
I think 5.
You would put 5?
I mean, I personally, but I think you could easily put 5.
Whoa. So, but that still had 2 A's. So I'm just like trying to think from trying to do translation.
Oh, the
trying to look
yanach
things
part?
up. Well, the
Mhm.
like. Even when I went there, it was like I was
okay.
I tried every variation and I
see.
couldn't find.
Yeah, so this
That.
is there's not very many situations that we've seen yet where we just see a verb root, but that's actually there's a whole verb there. I would put 1 0 there. Or no, I would put 2.
For the subject and object.
No, I would put the conjugation, prefix, and the classifier.
But not the subject or the object.
I would say there is, the way I would teach it, because then you start getting into this, the I, but you got to list it as a 0 in the pronoun chart. I just say, for second person commands.
Is there even a second person in there, or is it like listen?
It's not, right?
You don't have to say you listen.
The only time there is when it's a plus D classifier, then it has to be.
Then it has to be.
It has to be there. Because you cannot start a verb with only a consonant. Or I guess, let's say this, there cannot be only a consonant in the prefix.
With the exception of irias.
What?
Oh,
There cannot be only a consonant. There must be a vowel in the prefix, or nothing at all.
But what prefix?
For a verb. For example,
Yeah, but what kind of prefix?
for any. Like, you take the repetitive thing for would sich auch. A salmon has changed colors. If you said the repetitive form, salmon change colors, would be s'ach. But you cannot say s'ach as a verb. You have to say is'ach. So the I just pops up in there. Okay.
I guess my thing was when I saw that when you looked it up just now as a verb root, it had 2 A's in it.
Yes. So when we look up verbs, we always look them up long and low. They're always listed long and low. Or we're just, I think I've said it before.
You have, but you said a lot of things before.
Right. And so this is what, in practice, we start to sort of realize how all those things come together.
Okay.
And so this is also why I'm starting to teach these verbs as saying or vowels. It's one vowel with 4 variations. And whenever you look up a verb stem, you just always look it up long and long. Okay. So, how are we going to translate this? Translators! Translators! What was he telling him?
Did you say that verb meant finish, to completion?
Yeah, so in this case, it could also mean, well, where is the salmon? Out in the water. Where does he want it to go?
In his mouth.
So yes.
Oh, you mean like, what's he telling everyone?
Yeah, 'cause he could say
come
swim
check
to-
out the.
But yeah, but what's he going to tell him? Swim over here. But, to the shore. You could say to the shore. And so these are interesting things in translation too. Like, how much of that information do you give? Just like glossing. How much do you gloss? How much do you give? Who are we translating this for? I'm just going to say swim over here. Okay, reader. Who has not read yet?
Atwuchak, Waitiki, Waitakua.
Okay. How would we translate that?
He doesn't listen to him. Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry.
Oh,
He swam all around underwater.
so cha at wuchak. He just swam around.
Swam around.
Oops. He just swam around.
Out to sea.
Yeah. And then in this case, I'd probably say out at sea, away from the shore, like way out there. There's a lot of different ways you could say it. That king salmon, right? Okay. Heftig eet woes ach. You didn't listen to him. Time doesn't matter. Oops. That's right. Okay, somebody read this one.
Wana ne sawetach on ke ua.
Sheesh. How do we translate that?
He invited him to the village. I don't know. Ua ich reminds me of you do it ich.
Yeah. So when we find that ich one, to call out or to invite,
Oh,
right? But when you get the K in front of it, it's a slightly different verb, which is to shout.
oh.
Wanane, is that at some point or?
Yeah, wanane sawe is that at some point. And then kach on K ua ich. And the on is tricky here. I think the on is tricky. Right, Suksha? How would you translate that?
At some point, he really entices enticed him over here with it, or like he really he called him over. He called him with it.
Shouted.
Yeah, so this on, because the on is embedded in the verb, comes after the kach, we should assume that it's with it, in, I think. Because or else I would have to say on kanach, kach on kanach keuich. He shouted over the land. You would expect some sort of directional thing. If you say kach on keuich, like he's shouting with it, which is kind of weird. I don't know. At some point,
It's like he used it while he was crying out somehow.
right. Right. And so these are there's so many interesting decisions. Ah! Hey, King Salmon.
Now do all caps.
I don't know how we ended it. Somebody read this. We got time for a couple more. Maybe this is the last one. Oh, we got two more. I guess no, this is the last one.
Yanach yankak. Swim over here.
Swim over here. Oh, what happened? Yasuk ate itayakayik atain kay ahit. This, oh, did we do that? Spook, this little green stone. Ade itayakayeh.
The way this little green stone's talking about you.
Mm-hmm. The way it is insulting you. Or I guess no, talking about you, right?
It's implied. Kashikin
Kadain kay ahit.
What's the kadane?
I think that might improve.
Kadain is an adverb. It means to whatever to verb well
Oh.
or carefully.
Oh.
What about the kay ahit? Portative ksha.
Purposive yehwachi.
Hmm?
Purposive.
Purposive.
So you can really hear. I think with that the ka and the it. That's how the Downhowers describe the purposive.
So the verb root there is to hear.
Yeah. So these are really interesting questions to think about. This is one when you get into oratory, you're going to run into funky things where it's like, oh, here's another way that we can be using this verb. So, and sometimes you can just grasp that there's the qi, ah. From that, you should be getting like, you can hear, and then this, and then the it suffix at the end has to do with like, do this thing so you can do this thing. And there's a bunch of different ways to tie things together like that. And I think you got to look at them more and see how they're being used in a certain context. I think you start by doing a simple, just tying them together. Like you could say, yanach, yanchak. where yats uk ade edaya kaye edain eachi. Right, so that's an easier way. It's still a complex sentence, but eachi.
Yeah, but if you know what B is doing some modally thing, right? Even if you don't know what the H is doing.
What's that?
Even if you don't know what the H is doing. I guess.
Yeah, then you could see like that's some hortative-ish kind of a thing, right? Let you hear it, like you gotta hear it. Aka'awetsu khande yut u'chak. Last one. So let me just translate out. And then
His place.
de khande yut u'chak.
Not over yonder.
Duchande, I thought meant his place. His,
De khande is towards him.
oh,
You arrived, you came towards him from over yonder. Maybe. Like the salmon was coming towards Raven, which probably shouldn't do.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What yes? Yes again.
Yes, Khande.
It's confusing to me too sometimes, like, you have to put it in context too, is the.
Okay, we'll come back to this. We're out of time. Gonna choose playing you got okay away HNA. Which are you, hon? We won't get together Thursday, but we will get together next Tuesday and Thursday. We're gonna finish this king salmon. I don't know how much verb drilling we'll do. We'll try to focus on getting this done and getting some lessons from this particular story and how these things are being put together.
Do Éedaa so.
Yak kwan kla
Okay.
nach yake at